Dad's silent revenge.
My son Timothy stopped me at the hospital door after he'd driven 15 hours straight from Phoenix to Denver and said the words that would cost them everything. Dad, what are you doing here? Shell said she doesn't want you around during the delivery. 4 days later, when Denver General Hospital called asking how I'd like to pay the $9,200 delivery bill, I smiled for the first time since my grandson was born. Let me introduce myself. I'm Kenneth Thompson, 58 years old, and I spent 35 years as an insurance fraud investigator before I retired last year. My wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago from cancer, and since then, I've been focusing on what family I have left. What I discovered about my daughter-in-law would make my decades of investigating corporate fraud look like amateur hour. Let me back up and explain how we got to this moment. 3 weeks earlier, my daughter-in-law Michelle had called me from their modest 2-bedroom house in Denver, practically glowing through the phone. Ken, the baby's due any day now, and we'd really love for you to be here when he arrives. You're going to be such an amazing grandfather. I should have known something was off. Shell had never been that warm to me in the 5 years she'd been married to Tim. After Sarah died, Shell started calling me more often, but it was usually to ask about emergency expenses. Over the past year, I'd helped them with an $8,000 unexpected medical bill that Shell claimed their insurance wouldn't cover, and I'd contributed $15,000 toward their house down payment, when they said the bank required more money up front. At 58, recently retired, and still grieving my wife, I was trying to be the supportive father Sarah would have wanted me to be. The drive from Phoenix to Denver is brutal. 15 hours of desert highways, mountain passes, and endless stretches of nothing but sagebrush and sky. I packed my best clothes in my old leather suitcase, bought gifts for the baby at Target, and even booked a week at a decent hotel near Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. This was going to be the most important week of my retirement so far. My truck handled the mountain roads well, and every mile brought me closer to meeting my first grandchild. I stopped only for gas and coffee at truck stops, calling Tim twice to check for updates. Both times, Shell answered his phone, sweet as pie, telling me to drive carefully and that they could wait to see me. We're so excited you're coming, Ken. This baby is going to be so lucky to have you as his grandfather. When I finally pulled into the hospital parking garage at 2 a.m. on Tuesday morning, exhausted but excited, I felt like I'd accomplished something meaningful. The night shift security guard directed me to the third-floor maternity ward, where the receptionist behind bulletproof glass told me Shell was in labor, room 314. I walked down that sterile hallway with its fluorescent lights and motivational posters, carrying more anticipation than I'd felt in years. That's when I found Tim pacing outside the delivery room like a caged animal, still wearing his software company polo shirt and jeans from work. The moment he saw me walking toward him, his face changed completely. Not relief, not joy, something closer to panic. Dad, what are you doing here? The question hit me like a slap across the face. What do you mean? Shell invited me. She called and said you both wanted me here for the birth. Tim's eyes darted toward the delivery room door with its small rectangular window, then back to me. He looked like a man caught between two impossible choices, wringing his hands and shifting his weight from foot to foot. She changed her mind about having family here. She wants it to be just us. But I drove 15 hours, Tim. I'm here now. I'm not asking to be in the delivery room, just to be nearby when my grandson arrives. I know, Dad, but Shell's really adamant about this. You know how emotional she gets when she's stressed. And the doctor said any additional stress could complicate the delivery. Something in his voice told me this wasn't Shell's sudden change of heart. This felt planned, orchestrated, like they'd been discussing this scenario long before I'd even left Phoenix. But I was too tired and too shocked to fight in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. Fine, I said quietly, my voice echoing off the polished linoleum floors. I'll go to my hotel and wait for your call. Tim looked visibly relieved, his shoulders dropping as the tension left his body. This only confirmed my suspicion that I was being deliberately pushed out of what should have been one of the most important moments of my life. Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate you understanding. I'll call you as soon as the baby's born, I promise. I spent the next 8 hours in my hotel room at the Hampton Inn on 9th Avenue, checking my phone every 10 minutes and staring at the ceiling. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and had a view of the parking lot. When Tim finally called at 10 a.m. Wednesday morning, his voice was exhausted but happy. Dad, his here. Benjamin Timothy Thompson, 7 pounds 2 ounces, 20 inches long. He's absolutely perfect. Congratulations, son. When can I meet him? Another pause that lasted too long. Shell's really tired, Dad. The delivery was rough. Took 14 hours. Maybe give us a day or two to settle in at home first. I felt like I was begging for scraps from my own family, sitting in a sterile hotel room while my son and his wife bonded with my grandson just 3 miles away. Tim, his grandfather. I drove 15 hours to be here. I know, and we really appreciate that. But Shell needs to recover. The doctor said she needs rest. You understand, right? No, I didn't understand, but I agreed because what choice did I have? I spent 2 more days in that hotel room ordering room service and watching terrible daytime television shows while my son and his wife bonded with my grandson. I called the hospital twice asking about visitor policies, but they said I needed permission from the patient to visit. Friday morning came and went with no call from Tim. By noon, he'd had enough. I finally drove to the hospital myself, determined to at least see my grandson through the nursery window. That's when I discovered they'd already been discharged Thursday evening. I called Tim immediately from my truck in the hospital parking lot. You took the baby home without even telling me, Dad. Shell wanted to get home to her own space. She's been really anxious about germs and having too many visitors around the baby. I'm not a visitor, Tim. I'm your father. I'm Benjamin's grandfather. I know that. Look, maybe next month when things settle down and Shell feels more comfortable. Next month, I'd driven 15 hours to see my grandson next month. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I hung up, packed my bags, and drove back to Phoenix that same afternoon. If they wanted to exclude me from Benjamin's birth, fine. But they were about to learn that actions have consequences. The drive home gave me 15 hours to think. And by the time I pulled into my driveway in North Phoenix, I was angrier than I'd been since Sarah's funeral. My house felt emptier than usual that night, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home that Sarah and I had bought when Tim was in high school. I sat in my leather recliner, staring at the framed photos of Tim growing up, wondering where he'd gone wrong as a father. Sunday afternoon, 3 days after Benjamin was born, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Denver General Hospital. Is this Kenneth Thompson? Yes, ma'am. This is billing department at Denver General. We have some paperwork issues regarding the birth of Benjamin Timothy Thompson. The insurance claim was denied, and we need to discuss payment arrangements for the delivery bill. My heart started pounding, but not with anxiety, with something much more satisfying. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some confusion. I'm not responsible for that bill. Our records show you as the financial guarantor for Michelle Thompson's delivery. You're listed as accepting full financial responsibility for all charges related to the birth. And that's when I realized exactly what my dear daughter-in-law had done while I was driving across 2 states to be there for my grandson's birth. Ma'am, according to our records, you electronically signed financial responsibility forms for Mrs. Michelle Thompson's delivery on November 15th at 11:47 p.m. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, my mind racing back to that night. When exactly were these forms submitted? Let me check our system. It shows here that the forms were submitted electronically on November 15th at 11:47 p.m. Mountain Time through our patient portal. November 15th, the night I was driving through the middle of nowhere, Utah, probably around the time I stopped for gas and coffee near Salt Lake City. I'd been on the road for 8 hours, exhausted and focused on getting to Denver safely before my grandson was born. And how exactly were these forms submitted? Electronically through our patient portal system. According to our records, the digital signature appears to be yours, Mr. Thompson. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. While I was white-knuckling it through a late-night snowstorm on Interstate 70, desperate to reach Denver before my grandson was born, Shell was sitting somewhere with a computer, forging my signature on financial documents. I need to see these forms immediately. Can you email them to me? Certainly, Mr. Thompson. What email address should I use? KenThompsonPhoenix@gmail.com. 20 minutes later, I was staring at documents on my laptop screen that made my blood boil. Not only had Shell forged my signature, but Shed also somehow obtained my social security number, my current address, and even my banking information. The forms clearly stated that as the paternal grandfather, I was voluntarily accepting financial responsibility for the entire delivery as a gift to the new family. But the most infuriating part was the timing. These forms were submitted at 11:47 p.m. on November 15th, while Shell was sweet-talking me on the phone earlier that day about being there for the birth. She'd been planning to stick me with a $9,200 bill while excluding me from actually meeting my grandson. I called the hospital back immediately. This is Kenneth Thompson. I just reviewed the financial responsibility forms you emailed me, and I need to report fraud. Fraud, sir? First, I never signed these documents. Second, these were submitted without my knowledge or consent while I was driving through Utah at my daughter-in-law's invitation. I have evidence proving where I was when these forms were supposedly signed by me. The billing representative's tone changed immediately from casual to serious. Sir, if you're alleging document fraud, I need to transfer you to our legal compliance department immediately. Perfect. Transfer me now. While I waited on hold, listening to soft jazz music, I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. Screenshots of Shell's text messages inviting me to Denver, call logs showing the exact time Shed contacted me, even photos I'd taken during my drive with GPS timestamps embedded in the metadata proving exactly where I was when the forms were supposedly signed. Mr. Thompson, this is Margaret Shen with Denver General's Legal Compliance Department. I understand you're disputing financial responsibility forms that were submitted in your name. I'm not disputing them. I'm reporting identity theft and document fraud. I have substantial evidence that these documents were forged while I was traveling to Denver. For the next hour and 15 minutes, I provided the legal department with every detail of Shell's deception. They were particularly interested in the fact that Shell had invited me to drive to Denver while simultaneously committing fraud in my name. As someone had spent 35 years investigating insurance fraud, I knew exactly what evidence they'd need and how to present it clearly. Mr. Thompson, based on what you've told us and the documentation you can provide, this appears to be a clear case of identity theft and document fraud. This is indeed a very serious matter. We'll be filing a police report immediately and turning this over to our fraud investigation team. In the meantime, all charges assigned to your name are suspended pending our investigation. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring out the window at my backyard where Sarah used to tend her rose garden. Shell had played this perfectly. Shed gotten me out of the way during the birth, had her private family moment, and planned to stick me with a nearly $10,000 bill as a final insult. What Shell didn't know was that I'd spent 35 years investigating insurance fraud before retiring. I understood exactly how hospital fraud investigations worked, and I knew Shell had just committed several federal felonies. More importantly, I had the skills and experience to make sure Shed faced the full consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Tim. Dad, hope you made it home safely. Shell's doing great and Benjamin is such a good baby. We'll send pictures soon. Pictures. After excluding me from his birth and forging financial documents in my name, they thought pictures would smooth things over. I typed back, glad everyone's healthy. Looking forward to meeting Benjamin soon. What I didn't mention was that Iddy just spent the afternoon ensuring that Shell's fraud would be thoroughly investigated by both the hospital's legal team and local law enforcement. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own criminal actions. Tuesday morning brought another call, this time from Denver Police Department. Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Daniel Rodriguez with the Fraud Division. We've been assigned to investigate the identity theft case you reported through Denver General Hospital. We need to ask you some detailed questions about the timeline of events. Of course, Detective. I'm available anytime. Can you walk me through the complete timeline of events leading up to the alleged document forgery? For the next 45 minutes, I provided Detective Rodriguez with a methodical account of everything that had happened. Shell's invitation call 3 weeks earlier, the 15-hour drive with specific stops and timestamps, being turned away at the hospital door, the subsequent exclusion from seeing my grandson, and finally discovering the fraudulent financial responsibility form. As a retired investigator, I knew exactly how to present evidence clearly and chronologically. Mr. Thompson, do you have documentation supporting your version of events? I have text messages with timestamps, detailed call logs, photos from my drive with embedded GPS coordinates, hotel receipts from the Hampton Inn with check-in times, and gas station receipts proving I was traveling when the forms were allegedly signed by me. Well, need copies of all of that evidence. Based on what you've described, this is shaping up to be a clear case of identity theft and document fraud. The fact that the perpetrator invited you to travel while simultaneously committing crimes in your name suggests premeditation and planning. Premeditation. Shell hadn't just made a desperate decision in the heat of the moment. Shed planned this entire scenario probably from the moment she first called me about the birth. Detective, what happens next in your investigation? We'll be obtaining warrants for financial records, hospital surveillance footage, and digital evidence from the submission of these fraudulent forms. If our investigation confirms what you've told me, your daughter-in-law will be facing several serious felony charges under Colorado state law. After ending the call with Detective Rodriguez, I realized I felt lighter than I had in days. Not because I wanted Shell to face criminal charges, but because finally someone in authority was taking this seriously. I wasn't being paranoid or oversensitive about family dynamics. I'd been the victim of a calculated crime. Wednesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole in my front door, I could see a professional-looking woman in her 30s holding a manila envelope and an FBI badge. Kenneth Thompson, yes. I'm Agent Sandra Walker with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, Phoenix Field Office. I have some documents related to your case that I need you to review. She handed me the envelope and waited while I opened it on my kitchen table. Inside were printed copies of security footage, screenshots from Denver General Hospital. The images showed Shell sitting at a computer terminal in the hospital's family lounge area, typing on their patient portal system. Mr. Thompson, these images were captured by hospital security cameras on November 15th at 11:52 p.m. Mountain Time, approximately 5 minutes after the financial responsibility forms were submitted under your name. There was Shell, clear as day, hunched over a laptop computer in the hospital's third-floor waiting area. She was wearing the same blue maternity dress I'd seen her in during video calls. The timestamp on the security footage showed I was still 4 hours away from Denver, driving through a snowstorm somewhere in the Utah mountains with no cell phone service. What happens now with this evidence, I asked. The evidence is overwhelming and crystal clear. Hospital fraud becomes a federal offense when it involves identity theft across state lines, which is exactly what happened here. Your daughter-in-law is looking at significant federal jail time and substantial financial penalties. Agent Walker pulled out another document. Mr. Thompson, during our initial investigation, we discovered that this isn't an isolated incident. Your daughter-in-law has been under FBI surveillance for similar fraudulent activities involving other family members. My blood ran cold. Other family members. Over the past 18 months, Michelle Thompson has committed identity theft and financial fraud against at least 3 other relatives. We found evidence of credit card fraud against your son's younger sister, Rebecca Thompson, in California, unauthorized medical billing fraud against his cousin Nicholas Williams in Texas, and fraudulent insurance claims involving elderly relatives in Oregon. The scope of Shell's criminal activity was staggering. This wasn't a desperate new mother making poor financial decisions. This was a calculated pattern of criminal behavior targeting the people who trusted her most. Agent Walker, how long has this been going on? Based on our investigation, approximately 2 years. Michelle Thompson appears to be a professional fraud artist who systematically targets family members for financial exploitation. She's very skilled at gathering personal information and using emotional manipulation to avoid suspicion. As Agent Walker drove away in her black government sedan, I sat on my front porch watching the Arizona sunset paint the mountains purple and orange. A week ago, I'd been a grandfather driving across the country to welcome my first grandchild. Now I was a federal crime victim with my daughter-in-law facing serious prison time. My phone rang around 7 p.m. Tim's name appeared on the screen, but his voice sounded different when he answered, shaky, uncertain, afraid. Dad, what the hell did you do? Hello to you too, Tim. I'm doing fine, thanks for asking. Don't play games with me. FBI agents showed up at our house this morning with search warrants. Shell's been arrested for federal fraud charges. They said you pressed charges against her. I settled back in my favorite porch chair watching a roadrunner dart across my front yard between the desert plants. I didn't press charges, Tim. I simply reported identity theft when the hospital called asking how I wanted to pay Shell's delivery bill. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, what delivery bill? The $9,200 bill for Benjamin's birth that your wife assigned to me while you two were playing happy family and excluding me from the hospital. That's impossible. Our insurance covered everything. We have good coverage through my company. Poor Tim, still so naive about the woman had married and the criminal enterprise she'd been running right under his nose. Your insurance claim was denied, son. That's why the hospital called me. Apparently, Shell made me financially responsible for her entire delivery while I was driving through Utah to see my grandson, who I was then not allowed to meet. Another long silence. I could practically hear the pieces of his world clicking together in his mind as he processed what I was telling him. Dad, there has to be some reasonable explanation for this. Shell wouldn't do something like identity theft. There must be some kind of misunderstanding, wouldn't she? The same woman who invited me to drive 15 hours for the birth, then had you turn me away at the hospital door. The same woman who's been avoiding every one of my phone calls for the past week. She's been recovering from childbirth. Dad, it's been exhausting. Tim, she forged my signature on legal financial documents. The FBI has security camera footage of her doing it at the hospital computer. This isn't a misunderstanding or a paperwork error. I heard Shell's voice in the background, shrill and panicked. Tim covered the phone, but I could make out fragments of their heated conversation. Shell was claiming it was all a mistake, that she'd only put my name down as an emergency contact, that she never meant for me to be responsible for any bills. Dad, Tim came back on the line, his voice strained. Shell says this is all a misunderstanding. She put you down as emergency contact, not financial guarantor. Tim, I've seen the actual documents. I was an insurance fraud investigator for 35 years. I know the difference between an emergency contact form and a financial responsibility agreement. Your wife committed federal identity theft. Jesus Christ. His voice cracked with the weight of realization. Dad, what happens now, that depends on Shell and her attorney. The FBI agent told me that if she makes full restitution to all victims and cooperates with their investigation, they might consider reduced charges. But Tim, she didn't just steal money from me. She humiliated me. She made me drive across 2 states to be rejected at my own grandson's birth, then tried to stick me with a $9,200 bill for the privilege. I know and am sorry about that, but criminal charges, federal prison, she just had a baby, Dad. And I just became a grandfather, Tim. That didn't stop her from committing identity theft and document fraud. I could hear Benjamin crying in the background, and my heart clenched. This should have been such a happy time, my first grandchild, healthy and perfect. And instead I was discussing felony charges with his father. What do you want me to do? Tim asked finally. I want you to be completely honest with me about what really happened. Did Shell plan to exclude me from the birth from the very beginning? Another pause that seemed to last forever. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Yes. The confirmation hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd known it was true. Why? Tim, why would she do that to me? She said having you there would be stressful during the delivery, that she wanted the birth to be just our immediate family. I'm immediate family, Tim. I'm your father. I'm Benjamin's grandfather. I know that, Dad. I should have stood up to her. I should have told you what she was planning instead of letting you drive all that way for nothing. Yes, you should have. But you chose to protect her lies instead of protecting me from fraud and humiliation. And now she's facing federal charges because neither of you thought about consequences. The FBI investigation revealed that Shell's crimes weren't limited to my grandson's birth. Over the following weeks, federal agents uncovered evidence of similar fraud schemes involving family members across 4 different states. Shell Thompson wasn't just a new mother who'd made some poor financial decisions. She was a career criminal, and my case was just the tip of a very large iceberg. When the trial finally came 6 months later, the full scope of Shell's deception was revealed in federal court in Denver. She wasn't even who she claimed to be. Her real name was Amanda Brooks, and she'd been living under multiple false identities for years. She was still legally married to her supposed ex-husband Richard Davis, a professional con artist who'd been running family infiltration operations across the western United States. They'd specifically targeted my family because of my retirement assets and what they perceived as exploitable emotional vulnerabilities after Sarah's death. The plan was to have Shell establish a long-term relationship with Tim, systematically defraud our entire extended family, then eventually disappear with Benjamin and demand ransom money for his safe return. According to FBI testimony, Shell and Richard had detailed files on our family's financial status, property values, and retirement accounts. They knew exactly how much money they thought they could steal or extort from us over time. Shell was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without possibility of early parole. As we left the courthouse that day, Tim carrying Benjamin against his chest, I realized that Shell's criminal plan had backfired completely. Instead of destroying our family, her crimes had actually brought Tim and me closer together than we'd been since Sarah's death. Dad, Tim said as we walked toward my truck in the courthouse parking lot, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. For what, son? For refusing to let her get away with it. If you just paid that hospital bill quietly and let it go, Benjamin and I would probably be in serious danger right now. Who knows what she would have tried next? I looked down at my grandson, now 6 months old, sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. He was completely unaware that his mother had planned to use him as a pawn in a criminal enterprise. But he was safe now. Tim, the only thing Shell was right about is that there are others like her out there, targeting families just like ours. But she was wrong about one crucial thing. What's that? She thought she could exploit an old man's love for his family against him. What she didn't realize is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to let criminals hurt the people you care about most. As we drove home through the Colorado mountains that day, Benjamin babbling happily in his car seat, I realized that Shell had inadvertently given me something she'd never intended to give. The knowledge that I was still capable of protecting my family from anyone who tried to hurt them, and the satisfaction of knowing that my 35 years of experience fighting fraud had finally paid off in the most personal way possible. Tim moved back to Phoenix 3 months later, taking a job with a software company downtown. Now Benjamin and I spend every Saturday morning together in my backyard, where he's learning to walk among Sarah's rose bushes. Sometimes when I watch him laugh and play, I think about how different things could have been if I'd just paid that fraudulent bill and stayed quiet. But I didn't stay quiet, and my family is safer because of it. And if another predator ever targets my family, they'll learn the same lesson Shell learned in federal court. Some grandfathers are too experienced, too stubborn, and too protective to be easy victims. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong in family relationships. Those gut feelings often protect you from people who see your love as weakness to exploit. The greatest gift you can give your grandchildren isn't money or silence about family problems, but the courage to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult.